Today I am going to be reviewing the book, actually the books, the Iliad and the Odyssey. This is from a box set of Homer. Why did I decide to read or listen to the audio version of these books? Well, it's one of those classics that a lot of people quote and talk about, and I realized that even though I knew the story of Troy and Odysseus, I had never heard it from the first account, and so it's kind of funny because I would repeat this story and talk about this shit as if I knew it, and I didn't really know it because I had never read it. I hadn't read these, not really. So I listened to the audio, and I have to admit the Iliad was a little hard to digest. Both of these I listened at 2x speed, by the way. I could not handle it at 3 or 3.5x speed. Just too crazy. I probably could have eventually went up to 2.5, but I decided to go at 2x just to make sure I was getting all the language and all the names and everything and able to process this information. Iliad was hard to understand a little bit what was going on. It is basically about the War of Troy, and it kind of just jumps right in there with what's going on with the battle and the two armies, the Trojans, and there's a lot of battle and there's a lot of names and there's a lot of shit going on. I know the famous characters like Achilles, and it's kind of interesting. Like I thought the whole story it was definitely different than what I had imagined and heard. And even like, you know, I think you hear about Achilles and Achilles' heel, okay, and you hear about the Trojan horse, and none of that is actually in the book. In the whole story, you don't hear about that part of it. You don't hear about Achilles being killed by Paris, being shot with an arrow and all that stuff. You hear about that later actually in the Odyssey about what had actually happened, and it's just briefly mentioned. So it's kind of interesting to actually listen to it. How much the gods basically controlled what happened. So it's kind of interesting, you know, both these books in general took a lot of the valor away from men and place it on the gods. It placed a huge factor on the luck, essentially, on what the gods thought, as opposed to, you know, you could be essentially a great warrior, right, and have far superior skill, but if the gods decide that you're going to die and that someone weaker than you is going to kill you, and that no matter what you do, you're going to miss your strikes, then that's what's going to happen. The gods almost, in these books, are childish kind of beings that are toying with humans and have all kinds of emotional temper tantrums and all this shit. And, you know, do all kinds of weird things and fighting with each other and fighting with humans and jealous and all kinds of weird behaviors, right? So it's kind of interesting just to understand that perspective culturally. Odyssey was awesome. It was a really good book. In fact, it's kind of funny because when you hear about the Odyssey and Odysseus, you hear about his journey and his trials and him fighting the Cyclops and the Harpy, or not the Harpies, them opening the bag of wind and the north wind blowing them, you know, back. And you hear about, you know, kind of these things. And even though that was part of the story, that wasn't the main part of the story. That was like a retelling of the story of Odysseus telling that to some of the people that he encountered on the travel. But I thought that was interesting as well. A huge portion of the story that you never really hear about is what happens when Odysseus gets back home. And there's these guys that are basically like 50 of these guys or so that are basically courting his wife and eating all his food and wine, drinking all his wine and living in his house. And so he comes back and he basically kills them all, okay, with his son. And there's a huge amount that goes into all of that. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And that was actually one of my favorite parts of the book, because you're like, I wonder, you know, he's like getting all this shit heaped up on him and they're treating him badly, and then he fucking just wrecks them all. It's pretty awesome. I liked it. I thought it was real interesting. Like I said, Iliad is a little bit hard to get through, but once you get through that, the Odyssey I felt like was really good and worth the read. So I would say if you could only read one of them, read the Odyssey. But the Odyssey I think is more interesting when you encounter the characters from the Iliad, the kind of heroes and the backstories and stuff, and so it kind of connects the things together, and I think it fits in nicely. So there's a classic book for you that I think is definitely worth the read. And like I said, there's a lot of lessons in there, a lot of interesting stuff that's happened. So I will talk to you next time. Take care.